So, I am finally back making a new video for you guys. Thank you so much for being patient. If you've been following along and know the goings on, you know that I recently had to get bicep surgery on my right bicep. It has been a pretty rough week, lots of pain, lots of medication, so naturally it took me a while to get back to making a new YouTube video. But I did want to discuss this because it's obviously very relevant to my channel and the stuff that I tend to cover, because yes, we're talking about a Metroid Prime quote-unquote rumor. So I'm just going to cut right to the chase and not beat around the bush anymore. We're talking about another discussion and an idea that was floated around out there by everyone's favorite rumor starter, Jeff Grubb. And of course, I've covered Jeff Grubb's comments specific to Metroid and Zelda many times in the past. He's been very vocal over the past, I would say, 12 to 18 months when it comes to rumors and discussions and things that he says that he hears behind the scenes about Metroid and Zelda. Some have come true, some have not, some we're still waiting on. Metroid Prime Remastered, most famously, was the most recent situation that he predicted or claimed he knew about, and it did eventually happen, just way after he said that it would, and so that was a messy situation that I think we can say maybe what he had heard was true. Very tough to say, but at the end of the day, that game did come out, and it was amazing, so honestly, I just find that to be a win. And now I know, whenever I talk about Jeff Grubb, some people get very, very heated and animated about it. There are some folks out there that really dislike the guy, and they don't want to hear anyone talk about anything he has to say. And that's fine, that's your right and your call, but I personally like talking about it because his track record is like, I would say, maybe higher than 50%. I do definitely believe and basically know that he does know things and has connections. Obviously, like I already said, not everything he says has been right. Even some of the most notorious leakers, they do get things wrong sometimes. But this is one of those things where I think it's worth covering just to discuss whether or not we even should believe it. I'm not even saying for sure that what he's saying is 100% true, but I have some interesting thoughts on what he's claiming because it does line up with some things that I think may be true. It all makes sense to me. Doesn't mean he's right, like I said, but I want to dive into it. So nowadays, many of us probably know that Jeff does his Jeff Grubb's Gaming Mess podcast on YouTube, and that's usually where some of these quotes and things come from. He certainly gets himself in a lot of trouble sometimes. Of course, he had to shave his head a year ago, as we all know. But the quote around Metroid Prime 2 that we're discussing does come from that most recent episode from his podcast. And what he's doing is adding more fuel to the fire on this topic of Metroid Primes 2 and or 3 also getting the remaster or re-release treatment similar to the original Metroid Prime. And when that game was announced and finally came out in February of this year, a lot of conversation. I discussed it myself many times as well around whether or not we would see those games also get released, because what they did with Metroid Prime Remastered was so amazing, so impressive, wonderfully fantastic, great game, best graphics and visuals on the Nintendo Switch. The fact that it was my personal all-time favorite game that they did this for just made me so happy and giddy inside. And so of course we all want to know if Nintendo would be amazing enough to do the same thing with Metroid Primes 2 and 3. And so now Jeff Grubb comes out with this quote about what he's claiming might, okay, keyword is might, be happening with Metroid Prime 2. Here is a quick excerpt that he said from that podcast. Metroid Prime 2 Remastered probably is coming out relatively soonish. That is happening. That probably is happening relatively soonish. It's going to be mostly what people want, right? It's going to have the modern controls and it's going to be HD and things like that, but it's not going to get the love and care that Metroid Prime got, no. So essentially what he's doing is doubling down on this concept that if Metroid Primes 2 and 3 were also going to get re-released on the Nintendo Switch, that it might not get that same full, humongous remaster slash kind of sort of remake treatment that Metroid Prime 1 got, which again is something that I and many other people were talking about back when Metroid Prime Remastered released. And you know, I've gone back and forth in my head on how I would feel about that idea because, gosh, I just love Metroid Prime Remastered so much on the Switch, everything they did. I mean, the controls, of course, were fantastic. They added so many great options. It works wonderfully with dual analog controls. I love it that way. But more than that, of course, it's also the visuals. I mean, the graphics are just so amazing. The lighting, the textures, it's just out of this world. But it really just comes down to how amazing it would be to get a Metroid Prime 2 or 3 that was remastered with that same care and love. That is the win that we all want. But of course, there is the chance that they just do something more like an HD port. They just release the game, they make it HD, because currently those games have only ever existed in SD and standard definition. And maybe they would sell it for cheaper. You know, they sold Metroid Prime Remastered for $40, which is an insane deal. Maybe they would do $20 for Metroid Prime 2 if it was just an HD port. So that's kind of what he's saying here, but he also makes it sound like they might be putting still more love and care into it than just making it an HD port. And to me, that would be a very worthy compromise if this were to happen. I actually want to quickly call your attention to a fantastic video that a good friend of mine, Super Metal Dave 64, released many months ago in the wake and in the aftermath of Metroid Prime Remastered, where he discussed how Metroid Primes 2 and 3 could get also re-released on the Switch, and if they were to bypass the full remaster treatment that they gave the original game, maybe they could do this really impressive compromise between making it an HD port, but also using very fancy and impressive AI upscaling tricks to make Metroid Primes 2 and 3 look vastly more impressive than they already do, even if they were given an HD polish, and still re-release it so that it's a better version of what we've already had, but doesn't quite reach the full-on remaster treatment that the first game got. Now, I am not smart enough or tech-savvy enough to talk about it in depth. As many of you guys know, I've always been very transparent and upfront with that. I am really stupid when it comes to the technical aspect of games, and you might find that funny as a now 43-year-old man that's been playing video games for 40 years, but it's just never clicked with my brain. I am not that guy. Dave, however, is, and he plays a lot of stuff on emulation, and he does a lot of live streams of these things, and he made this great video. I'm going to link it below. You're seeing some footage here, so I highly recommend following the link below, watching his video, hearing him explain it, and also seeing even better quality footage of how Nintendo could release a very well-made HD port, upscaled port of Metroid Prime 2 that doesn't quite reach the remaster treatment but would still blow us away. And so at the end of the day, should we even believe this? Can we believe what Jeff Grubb is saying about Nintendo later this year, by the way, revealing a Metroid Prime 2 port, and maybe it's a full remaster like they did the first game. Maybe it's a cheap, straight, off the assembly line HD port with no fancy bells and whistles. Or maybe it's that middle of the road kind of thing, like he says, where they are going to give us the same kind of control options and maybe do some slight tweaks and updates to the visuals and other quality of life improvements, and maybe even do something similar to like what Dave mentions in his video, where they use AI tricks to make a quick but really effective and super impressive graphical upgrade. Maybe they do something like that. So here's the thing. I don't really want to make a claim specifically on Jeff's exact prediction or rumor or whatever it is he's stating, because, I mean, I like Jeff. I'm not trying to say that I don't believe the guy or don't trust the guy, I should say. But I don't really want to comment as much on what he says as much as I want to just talk about the fact that, to me, it just makes sense. I've long believed, ever since Prime Remastered was revealed and released, that 2 and 3 made a ton of sense. And yes, I'm going to keep referring to Dave's video. When he made his video breaking down the technology that exists to make these games look so good without giving the full remaster treatment, I just believe that Nintendo realizes there is a huge opportunity with Metroid Prime 4 somewhere in the near future to also re-release Metroid Primes 2 and 3, give them some sort of visual upgrade, give us those control options like Jeff mentions in his, comment from his podcast, and they could make a ton of money. And something else that, if I'm being honest with you guys, also adds to my believability of this is what Nintendo is choosing to do with Pikmin. Because Pikmin 4 is coming out tomorrow, the day after I'm recording this video. And in response to, or in the hype, in the build-up, I should say, to releasing Pikmin 4, Nintendo also shadow dropped HD ports. Okay, this is where they did just straight HD ports of Pikmin 1 and 2. They shadow dropped them from the last Nintendo Direct on the eShop digitally, and they are releasing a Pikmin HD 1 and 2 physical pack in September. So they're doing almost the exact same thing they did with Metroid Prime Remastered back in February with Pikmin's 1 and 2, which are 2 GameCube games. What if Nintendo is planning to do something very similar to that with Metroid Prime 2 and or 3 later this year? The fact that they were willing to do it with Pikmin, and the fact that they've already done Metroid Prime Remastered anyway, and Metroid Prime 4 again is coming out soon, I mean, boy, it just makes too much sense to me, man. There is a lot of smoke to this fire. And of course, lest we forget that almost for sure we will be getting that September Nintendo Direct. I think of all the typical months that fans like to think we're going to see a Nintendo Direct happen at the same time every year. People talk about a June Direct, a Summer Direct, a January Direct, a February Direct, blah, blah, blah. Those ones tend to jump around a lot. I think, and I'd have to double check, so maybe my memory is wrong here. I think the most consistent month in the history of Nintendo Directs for us to see one happen the same month every single year without fail, I'm pretty sure it is September. So unless this is going to be the first time in a long time that Nintendo wants to change things up and surprise us, I feel pretty comfortable saying 99% we will see a Nintendo Direct in September this year, because they always do that. And what if, even though we have Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and even though we have Super Mario RPG coming out in October and November, listen, man, they shadow dropped Metroid Prime Remastered. They shadow dropped Pikmin 1 and 2. What if, in a September Nintendo Direct, this lines up with our theories, this lines up with Jeff's comments, what if this September they also shadow drop this Metroid Prime 2 remaster, re-release version, whatever it turns out to be? Straight port, huge remaster, middle of the road upgrade. What if they do a shadow drop this September and they're adding on to that, Metroid Primes 1, 2, and 3 re-release leading up to Metroid Prime 4 sometime next year? Man, maybe I'm being a Metroid fanboy, and maybe I'm being overly optimistic and getting my hopes up, and I am not trying to lead you guys astray, okay? I'm hoping I'm being transparent enough in my theorizing and my predictions and my excitement and my dissection of Jeff's comments here. So I'm not trying to lead you guys astray, like I said, but doesn't it just make sense? Doesn't it feel possible, Man, I'm being really, really hopeful here, but I would just love to see something like this happen. So this is what Jeff said. This is the situation as I see it. You guys know me as a Metroid superfan. I've heard a lot of things behind the scenes over the years. I heard stuff about a 2D Metroid before Metroid Dread came out. I'll be honest with you guys, I haven't heard anything about the Metroid thing, okay? Or the Metroid Prime 2 thing, I should say. I am literally going off of Jeff's comments, the fact that he gets a lot of things right, but not everything right. I'm going off of what makes sense in my brain, the typical track record for Nintendo, what makes sense in the build-up to Metroid Prime 4, some of Dave's breakdown about AI technology being able to upscale impressively, a lot of stuff that goes into it, and so, I don't know, man. Part of me thinks that maybe in September Nintendo would blow us away and shadow drop Metroid Prime 2 remaster, remake, update, port, HD, whatever the heck. Maybe something like that happens, so this is what I hope to see in September, and so that's about it.